Good evening, and welcome to tonight's free-range conversation with American Farmland Trust. My name is John Piotti. I'm AFT's president, and we're going to begin in just a moment, and we're pleased that you can join us tonight for what I think will be a really exciting conversation with a surprise announcement at the end, so you want to hang in there. Before we begin, a few quick points to make. Right now, we're dialing out to thousands of AFT members across the country. So just stay on that line and we'll be diving into our conversation soon. These free-range conversations give you the opportunity to ask questions, and you can press 0 at any time and you'll be connected directly to a member of AFT staff to get your question into the queue. Now, if you have just joined us, good evening and welcome to tonight's free-range conversation with American Farmland Trust. I'm John Piotti. Some of you have already heard this, but I'm repeating it as the phone calls go out there. We're here tonight with some special guests, and we will begin in just a moment. We're still dialing out to thousands of members across the country, so just stay on the line for another minute, and we will begin diving into our conversation very soon. And if you have a question at any point during the event, you can press 0. And you'll be connected to a member of our staff, and your question will get in the queue. Now, we've been doing these free-range conversations every few months for a little over 3 years, and they've been fun, and they've been, I hope, informative, but this call is different. One way it's different is that it's a follow-on conversation to a Facebook forum we had on Sunday, where we identified some of the major challenges facing farming. Now, tonight's focus will be on what we can do to respond to those challenges, and I'll again be joined by 3 experts from AFT staff. Another way tonight's free-range conversation is different is that I'm doing it from my home in Maine without any on-site technical support. Fortunately, I do have Alex down in D.C. helping me remotely, but there may be some hiccups here and there, so bear with us. And finally, tonight's free-range conversation is obviously different because the times are different. We are living in a pandemic which has disrupted our lives, sometimes tragically. The pandemic has devastated markets for some farmers, and that's exactly why AFT created its Farmer Relief Fund, which has already, I'm very pleased to say, helped over 1,200 farmers during these difficult times. Beyond this, the pandemic has really raised public awareness of just how fragile our food system is. I sometimes say that AFT is in the business of trying to avoid future crises. We are about getting farming right before it's too late, before we run out of food, and while there is still time to heal a damaged planet. Yet there's plenty of reason to be optimistic about the future, and tonight's focus is on solutions. And as I mentioned, we have a big announcement at the end that you're going to want to stay and hear about. Before I introduce our guests, I'll remind you that you can ask a question by pushing 0 on your phone. And since our focus tonight is on solutions, I will try to choose questions that fit with that theme. Now, last Sunday, 3 members of AFT staff, experts in their field, joined me in outlining some of the big picture challenges confronting farming. We structured it in 3 categories: the land itself, the farming practices that are employed on that land, and the people who steward that land, our hardworking farmers and ranchers. Or in summary, the land, practices, and people. Now, with Mitch Hunter, our research director, we spoke about the primary challenge facing our agricultural land, that we are losing it, that it is being developed, fragmented, or otherwise converted to uses other than agriculture at a rate of 2,000 acres a day. You heard that right, 2,000 acres a day. That adds up to 11 million acres in a 15-year period. Now, 11 million acres, that sounds abstract, but here's what it is. That is equivalent to the amount of land which right now in our nation grows all of our vegetables, all of our fruit, and all of our nuts. We've lost that much land in a 15-year period. Now, we also talked about how this farmland loss issue, it doesn't only affect cities and suburbs, where, say, a 100-acre farm on the edge of development might become a couple of hundred new house lots. Farmland conversion is also a big issue in rural areas, where that 100-acre farm may be broken up not into 300 house lots, but broken up over a period of years into 10-acre or 20-acre parcels that are nonetheless too small for viable farming. So it's an urban and suburban issue as well as a rural issue. And it's happening in every state. That's the challenge. What can be done? Well, the good news is that we know what tools work to protect farmland. Agricultural conservation easements permanently protect the land, while good tax policy and good community planning take farms out of the path of development. AFT and our partners in farmland protection, we've developed and refined these tools over the last 40 years. They work. It is simply that we are not utilizing them as widely and intensely as we must. So the solution? It's to catalyze a new wave, the next wave of agricultural land protection. I'll highlight 3 strategies AFT is pursuing. 1, we've created the National Agricultural Land Network. This elevates the kind of assistance that AFT has been providing to the land trust community for years. We just launched it this spring, and we already have 118 groups actively participating. Second, we're doing everything we can to increase the amount of public funding for easement purchases, both at the federal level and in many states. And third, and I'm obviously touching on all of these very lightly, we've got lots to cover tonight. Third, we're investing new staff and resources in some key states where the needs and opportunities are greatest, as identified by AFT's recent research. This last strategy leads me back to Mitch Hunter, who's with us again tonight. Mitch coordinated AFT's Farms Under Threat study that quantified and classified what's happening with farmland across the nation. Mitch, welcome back. Mitch,
thanks, John. Good to be back.
Well, it's great to have you. AFT says that farmland loss is both an urban and a rural problem, and it affects all states. But the research shows that there are some states where it is worse. Speak to that.
Yeah, that's right, John. So we found that, for instance, New Jersey converted almost 9% of its agricultural land in just 15 years, the highest in terms of percentage. And the most conversion by acres was across the Southeast, in places like Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas. And Texas alone converted almost 1.4 million acres.
Wow. I think that AFT's research could really help states that really want to do more, that hope to do more with farmland protection, do that, right? It's useful to have that underlying research to figure out what your strategy should be. Am I right on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think 2 ways. So first, the maps that I was just talking about show how recent conversion has affected each state's land, and including their best farmland and ranch land. So having that map can help them prioritize where to do the work. And then at the same time, we also did in-depth research to identify the policies that all 50 states are using today to protect their agricultural land, and also to identify best practices from across the country. So if you put all that together, that enables every state to build a roadmap to develop better farmland protection policy.
Great. Well, I'm going to be coming back to you with some audience questions in a few minutes, but right now we want to turn to the second big challenge that we identified on Sunday, and that involves farming practices. And the summary is this: despite a lot of work by AFT and many other groups, and to be honest, a lot of federal money, we are not yet adopting at the scale that's needed advanced farming practices, regenerative farming practices that build soil health, increase resiliency, and combat climate change. Now, in response, AFT is trying to do more, and in some cases, we're changing some of our tactics. We're working with farmers to quantify the economic benefits of regenerative practices and then documenting that in case studies. So there's both the economic and the environmental benefits are clear. We've launched a new climate initiative, which, among other thrusts, helps state governments advance new agricultural policies and programs. And we've been having great success with a problem we call Women for the Land, a program we call Women for the Land, which helps underserved population better understand conservation options and the federal programs that might be able to help them. That's just a sampling. Now, with me tonight is Jimmy Dacus, a longtime veteran of AFT, who I turned to a few years ago to launch our climate initiative. Hey, Jimmy, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well.
Great. Jimmy, tell us about, and we're trying to keep it short here. We can get a lot more in with questions and answers later. Tell us about one new program or effort that you're particularly excited about, that you think is going to make a real difference promoting widespread adoption of regenerative practices.
Well, I'm really excited about replicating new programs that have successfully demonstrated promoting adoption at higher rates and lower costs. A great example of that is a pilot program in Iowa and Illinois to promote cover crop adoption. So the innovation here is to provide an incentive as a premium discount through the crop insurance program. In Illinois, AFT and our partners worked with the Department of Ag to develop the program and secure funding for the last couple of years. But it's been really popular. The program's filled up in just 2 weeks, and yet the payment is only $5 per acre. So it's much less, dramatically less than other cost share programs. So now AFT and our partners are working to try to advance similar programs in other states, and in particular in the Midwest, where there's been a great interest in trying to understand how they can implement a program in their states.
That's great. That's great. And you know what you hinted at is these are programs at the state level that could potentially become national programs. Is that correct?
Absolutely. One of the things that we'll be doing is looking how to sort of scale this up and then try to take it to the federal level and then incorporate it into the federal farm bill and the crop insurance program.
Yeah, great. And the time is good because the next farm bill's up in maybe 3 years, and here's a chance to document the benefits of those programs and then tee it up. That's great. We're going to move on to our next guest to talk about our third challenge, which is about how we keep farming economically viable so that both existing farmers can stay in business and new farmers can afford to enter the field. And AFT's activities directly supporting farmers, they run the gamut. We train people around the country to help them work with farmers and ranchers with a real focus on beginning farmers. We've been working on tax reform issues that will, say, reduce the barriers that landowners face when they sell to new farmers and a lot more. And I want to turn now to Julia Freegood, who oversees much of what AFT does to improve agricultural viability and support the next generation farmers. So tell us, Julia, about one program that you think is particularly novel or creative or impactful that's going to help us keep farmers on the land.
Sure. I'll start by just sort of reiterating what you said, which is I am really proud of all the curriculum we've created and the trainings we've delivered and the resources and assistance we've provided to help transition land and open doors to land access to a new generation. But the program that I'm most excited about right now, and which I think will be especially impactful, is a new microgrant program that AFT launched in New England this year to provide grants between $500 and $5,000 to help 41 farmers so far overcome the financial barriers and hire professional assistance so that they can gain access to land and do the succession planning that they need to do to transition that land to a new generation. I hope we can find partners and raise the funds to expand this program nationwide.
Yeah, it's great, and it's really, from what I understand from our New England office, it's really resonating with the farmers out there. It seems to be the right fit. That's great. I am being told that we have very few people who have called in with questions. So please, we know there are many people out there. If you have questions, please press zero and get us a question. We do have a few that were sent in before the call. And so we'll begin with some of those, and hopefully a few others will come up in the queue while we're answering these. So I'm going to begin. I'll start right with you, Julia. And we have a question that Lydia submitted earlier, and it was this: what is AFT doing to put land access into the hands of people of color, our Native American, Black, Latino, and others that also want land and they're needed to improve our food system? What are we doing to help those underserved populations?
That's a great question. We're actually doing quite a bit in this space. We're intentional about addressing land access needs of all the different kinds of people who are ready and willing to farm, from the BIPOC populations here to women and veterans, young farmers who don't come from a landed farming background, and also those who do. And we do this by developing curriculum and trainings. We've trained cohorts of land access trainers. We've worked with them to adapt our curriculum for many different populations. Some of them have translated into as many as 8 languages and into sort of more visual aids. We tend to be a little verbal. And to help new generation producers navigate the ins and outs of land access. In terms of BIPOC farmers in particular, we're co-learning to become better allies, to address their specific needs and what they would like from us. And these vary between populations. We're also developing policy proposals, and in some parts of the country, as I mentioned before, we have funding to provide microgrants to help new gen producers hire professionals to help them get onto suitable land. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the portfolio right now.
Yeah. Well, it's critically important. The face of farming is very much changing, and a lot of people who are entering farming it's people with second careers. It's a lot of folks who haven't traditionally been farmers. A lot of farm workers might be Black or Latino, but not a lot of farm owners traditionally, and that's beginning to change, and that's a good thing. And it's great that we're doing more in that space. I'll be frank, we're not doing enough in that space. We have some programs, some of the better programs that are out there, but more can be done. And I don't want to belabor this if you don't want to respond and augment your answer, Julia, but do you have any thoughts on what I just teed up?
I do, and I think that all of us need to do more work in this space, partly because we really want to have farmers in the future, and what my experience suggests is that a lot of the new gen producers who are much more diverse maybe than we expect from traditional agriculture also are coming in with a lot of values about community and food access and sustainable or regenerative practices. And so they're bringing a lot of really good new energy to agriculture. And so it's really important to help them succeed. But there are also a lot of structural barriers and a lot of historical injustices that stand in the way and really need to be addressed. And so we as an organization need to learn more about that and become more helpful in overcoming some of those barriers going forward so that everybody who wants to farm is able to farm going forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Calls are coming in. You guys are asking your questions, so that's great, but I want to respect the people who did their homework and called in earlier. So I'm going to handle 1 or 2 more questions of that sort and then get to the queue. So the next one, this is for you, Jimmy. It's from Alex. Simple question, maybe not with a simple answer. How are you working to reduce U.S. agricultural emissions?
Thank you. Well, AFT is working. The goal is to accelerate the adoption of regenerative ag practices that sequester carbon and reduce GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. So we talked about a couple of projects, but let me go into a little more breadth here. We're doing policy advocacy at the state and federal level, right, to try to get more incentives and technical assistance. We're also doing things like training the trainers so that we have enough people who can provide technical assistance to implement those conservation practices. Conducting research to measure and quantify so that we can track and report the greenhouse gas impacts of these conservation practices. And also, as John mentioned, the economic impact for farmers, but also so that policymakers and the public understand this. Exploring and working to advance new market-based solutions, like paying farmers for some of these solutions. And then lastly, just in communication, raising the profile of ag as a solution to climate change, because many people still don't understand this.
Great. All right. Useful. Very useful. Yeah. I mean, I think you could talk at length about that because we're doing so many things and there's so many different strategies that are possible out there. I think also about dairy farmers who might be looking at things like methane digesters and folks who are looking at biodiesel on their farms for running their equipment. And there's just so many different strategies, and we are, we're up for supporting anyone with the good idea that might help move the needle. We have a very ambitious goal to make sure that our farming activities are first carbon neutral and then ultimately a carbon sink. So we have a lot of work to do. One more prior question. This one for you, Mitch, and I got to find it here on my sheet. Here we go. So this was from Ace, and he asked, you talked about how we're losing a certain number of farmland acres every year. This was a question that came in on Sunday when we got into more detail on that topic, but we didn't have a chance to answer it then. It always sounds like a scary number, but what is the goal? As long as the population grows, as long as that population is growing, we're going to need some new land for development. So how do you balance those things? How do you make it work? How much farmland do we really need? Mitch?
Yeah, that's a big question, but a really fascinating one. I'll give you a concrete answer first as far as what our goal is as AFT. We've set a goal to reduce annual conversion rates by 75% by 2040. So today we're converting about 2,000 acres a day, and by 2040 we would the goal is to only be converting about 500 acres a day. And 500 acres a day is far from zero. I guess you might wish that we could get there. What I think it says to me is, it's a pretty reasonable goal that still leaves plenty of room for development if we do development right, and hopefully we're developing for good reason, for infrastructure and land uses that really benefit society and communities, and that we're also at the same time protecting our most important farmland and ranch land. And then at the community level, at the local level, I think you translate that down by, having a conversation in a very structured and committed way about what you want your community to look like in the future, and really valuing farmland and agriculture in that process. Because I think too often land is lost forever without a whole lot of public input or foresight about what it means for the future of a community. So we have our big goal for nationwide, and then I think that, of course, needs to get translated down so that every community is making good decisions about their food system, agriculture as an economic driver, agriculture as a piece of the natural environment, and all of those pieces put together at the local level.
Great. Super. All right, we're going to turn now to some members of the audience. We've gotten a number of questions that have come in. We are going to start. We're not doing this as efficiently as we normally do because I'm in Maine and Alex is in D.C., so I'm going to say the name and then he's going to connect the person, hopefully, and we're going to cross our fingers that it all works. So, Alex, the first one is Julia in Colorado. We get Julia there. Hi, Julia, you there?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. What's your question?
My question is if you, within your regenerative programs, if there is an educational system for teaching farmers about no-till, because that ties in with climate change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it sequesters a lot of CO2.
Yep.
And
well, let me pass that off to Jimmy. He's our expert. And Jimmy, why don't you begin by just describing for people what no-till or reduced tillage as well, what that is.
Yeah, so one of the things that you want to do to rebuild soil health, and with healthy soil, you are keeping the carbon in the ground and in the plant roots. So you're actually sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. But you want to minimize the disturbance. So you want to minimize that tillage. And so no-till means you're not doing any till. Conservation or reduced till is some tillage. And so that can keep carbon in the ground. And when you couple that with maximizing soil cover and having cover crops on it, then we can start seeing some significant amount of increase in the soil carbon and drawing down from carbon from the atmosphere. So one of the things that that we're doing is, and we've been doing it and expanding it to more and more states, is something that I mentioned before about train the trainer. One of the things we've noticed is that there's a lot of people who understand and try the practices maybe the first time, whether it's some tillage or cover crops, but trying to get the expertise to provide technical assistance on the ground to help people to learn how, get over the learning curve to work tillage and to work cover crops. So what we've been doing is setting up programs around the country in different states to train the trainers so that they can go back out and be working, as you said, with the farmers and ranchers themselves to be implementing those programs and then learning as it's going, because there's a learning curve, taking a couple of years to get it right and to really understand for your operation how to make that work.
Great, Jimmy. Now, one thing about AFT is we're a relatively small organization, 115 employees, spread across 20-ish states. And we do work differently in different places, depending on need and opportunity and what other groups are doing and where we can fill a void. So in some places, we are helping other professionals do their job better, the train the trainer kind of programs that Jimmy just alluded to. In other states, though, we do direct training on soil health with farmers. In other states, we help advance policy and provide program support so that this might happen at the state level. So it really varies. It's not one size fits all, but we have a myriad of strategies designed to elevate the use of no-till and low-till, and it's been one of the successes. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jimmy, but it's about 3/4 of the cropland in the country right now are either no-till or low-till, which is a huge step forward.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another question. I don't have a location, but Alex, it's Chris. He's right at the top of the list. I want to reward people for being early callers in. There we go. Chris. Can you hear us, Chris?
Hi, yeah. So, yes, I can. Thank you. Thanks for doing this. Yes, I'm Chris. I'm from a place called Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin, right in the Madison-Milwaukee corridor. And my question is somewhat related to the training of the trainers. I work for a land conservation organization, but I also am a certified farm succession coordinator through IFTM. And I'm noticing that this succession coordinating or transition planning service is largely unheard of by many farmers who are of the age that should be doing the planning.
Right.
So my question is, what is AFT doing to make sure that service is more known, and then also for for those of us who are doing it, I really want to serve the needs of these farmers as opposed to project my perception of what they might be needing onto their situation. So I'm looking for more training, I guess. So what is AFT doing to do those two things, both make it more available and then make us better at our jobs?
Great question, and I'm going to obviously pass that one off to Julia, but I just want to say, Chris, thank you for what you're doing, supporting farmers in this way. This kind of planning is so essential, really, to the future of ag. So, Julia, what's your response?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and actually we have somebody on our team who also went through that training, and we try to incorporate that to some extent into our land access training, which is also a train-the-trainer model. And our hope, and fortunately I'm not really supposed to announce this, but it looks like we're going to be getting some funding for the next 3 years to be developing more curriculum in this area, and really looking at people like you to think through how do we create a nationwide network to make this more available, more visible, more widely known, and tapping the resources of people who are already doing really good work in the space. We do have a farmland information center, and so that's a place that people can call us and get technical assistance. We also have a website, and we're trying to figure out how to – it's used a lot, and so when people call us, we can send them to people like you, people who are succession trainers. New England has a big network as well. But we're trying to figure out sort of what you're talking about, which is how to operationalize that and really create a very widely known network on both sides of the issue, so on the transition side but also on the access side for that new generation coming in. I would love to talk to you offline sometime. I know John wants me to limit my time here, so feel free to call us and we can have this conversation. It's really important.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So the next one I've got here, I don't see a location either. It's Eugene. Can you find him, Alex? There we go. Eugene, you're
Hi,
on.
this is Eugene speaking.
Hi,
thanks
what's
for taking my call.
Yes.
So I wanted to learn a little bit more about initiatives or any programs that are specifically for landowners who are not aware of AFT. It's very similar to previous questions, but is there any exposure or make it more visible, any initiatives related to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I might take a first stab at that, and then I'll give any member of the team a chance to jump in if they would like. So my response is that AFT, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is really structured differently in different places. And we sometimes say that we launched the conservation agriculture movement, and a lot of what that means is that we got other groups started, and then we've been providing services to allow them to be successful. So if a landowner is interested principally in land protection, for instance, there's usually an agricultural land trust, or at least a land trust with some knowledge of farming in that farmer's region. And they are the best folks to go to first. And what we do is we provide a lot of support to those groups. We make sure they get the latest research. We help provide them with models on how to do agricultural land protection the best ways possible. We advocate for policy change that will help them do their job better, including funding. But then there are some parts of the country where there isn't a viable ag land trust. And in that case, you can come directly to us. So you have to do a little sort of searching to figure out what category you're in, but we have a tool for that. We run something called the Farmland Information Center, and you can go right into there and search by state and find out the entities that are doing the work, and then reach out to them, or if there isn't one in your area, reach out directly to us. You can also talk to a real live person at the Farmland Information Center. We have folks with a lot of experience on farmland protection, on farming practices, And you or a farmer can just reach out and talk to that person, and they will guide you. So you don't have to sort through 20 websites and people say, oh, the answer is in the website. You can go directly to a person. You can get that. You can use a phone. You don't even have to send an email. You don't have to even go online. You can just call the Farmland Information Center, and you will have to go online to get the phone number. But you can call them and get an answer. I focus mostly there on farmland protection issues because that's where we have a really broad network of ag land trusts across the country. On the farming practice side, and on some of these issues around land access, it's a little bit less organized. Some states have active players, other states don't. But again, the Farmland Information Center can get you started. So that's my response. Does anyone have any additional piece of information they'd like to add to that? Okay, I guess not. Alex, I no longer have a list of people in the queue in front of me. I don't know why. But for some reason, that's not on my screen anymore. Can you help me?
Yes, I will try to reconnect.
Okay.
Hey, John, while you're looking for that, this is Jimmy. I would maybe just elaborate on that last piece. Just one of the things on the practice side is there's the network of conservation districts are in almost every single county, or they serve multiple counties, and they're a wonderful source of information, especially as it plays out in your local community. And AFT does a lot of our work in cooperation with the conservation and the soil and water conservation districts. So that's another one of those sources of information and partners that we work with.
Great. Super. That's really helpful. So let's see. I have a Joseph from Alabama. Put Joseph on.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Hi. What's your question?
Just wondered if they were. Yes, I just wondered. I had a short question from the perspective of sustainability. Does AFT have any knowledge of any organizations or any research being done as it relates to heirloom seed varieties which are open pollinated because of their inherent disease resistance, so that you don't have to use as much pesticide, and also the fact that they're highly adaptive to a microclimate or local area, so they can be more productive?
Yeah. Well, you've just teed up the point that agriculture is a very broad and complex set of issues that we need many players to be engaged in. And although I think of AFT as having a very broad, holistic mission, and a lot of people on staff care about things like heirloom varieties and seed saving and the like, and might be involved. We as an organization don't directly deal with that, but again, we do indirectly in that we support a lot of organizations that operate locally, operate at the state level, and their portfolio might include some of that kind of work. Julia, for instance, has done a lot of work on community resiliency and planning for ag, and that has undoubtedly, and this is my lead into you, Julia, hope you're ready, and that undoubtedly has probably involved some organizations that have been involved in those kind of issues. Likewise, our connections with the academic community, which are strong, obviously they've done some research in this area as well. So, Julia, any hopeful thoughts or insights for Joseph?
I think it's a really good point, and you're right. There, in terms of doing community level work, I bump into this a lot, both in terms of plants, but also in terms of heritage breeds for livestock. But I'm not an expert in that. I would say, John, because you've been touting the sick a lot, that is usually where I send people as the first place. And the toll-free number for anybody who has a pencil and and a piece of paper is 800-370-4879. And even during the pandemic, we are still taking calls and technical assistance requests. So please do contact us, or you can go to the website at farmlandinfo.org, or you can find it on AFT's website as well. And there's a place to ask questions online as well.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Thank you for
John, if you don't mind me indulging myself as an
please.
agronomist, I'd like to jump in just really quick.
Absolutely.
So to Joseph's question, I can recommend a couple of organizations that are great resources, both kind of in the Seed Savers network. So there's Seed Savers Exchange, and then where you are in Alabama, I would think that the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange would be even more suited to what you're looking for, because they literally are, using heirloom varieties and developing and maintaining heirloom varieties that are specifically adapted to southern conditions. Both of those organizations have seed catalogs. They'll sell you seed, and they facilitate seed exchange in a way that kind of builds the community and the network as well. So I would go to Seed Savers Exchange or Southern Exposure Seed Exchange.
Great. Thank you. All right. Let's move on to the next speaker. We have Dorothy. Again, location unknown. We find Dorothy.
Hi. Thanks for taking
Dorothy.
my call. Hi.
Yeah.
I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I have, it's not exactly a farming question. It's when Julia was speaking about people in from cultures, I guess you'd say, other than white, it sounded like she said BIPOP. Like, it sounded to me like B as in boy, I, P as in Paul, O-P. And I just wondered what she was, what term, and I thought maybe other people might be wondering that same thing.
It's a great question, because everyone in this business uses abbreviations and acronyms and things way too much. So, Julia, here's your chance to spell it out.
Well, first of all, shame on me, and I apologize to everybody. That I really should have been more careful. But yeah, so it's a term of art these days that means Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
Very good.
Right, you heard it correctly. It is BIPOC.
Great. Thanks for asking, because I'm sure other people were wondering as well. And great to keep us honest in that regard. Great. We have Peter from New York. Peter. I know Peter well. Hi, Peter.
Hi, John. How are you?
I am well. How are you doing?
Picking apples.
Yeah,
We're
how's
just
the
starting.
crop this year?
Well, don't ask a farmer how things like that, because we always have negative responses. Either too hot, too cold, too large, too small. But anyway, my question was, how do we deal with the issue of small farms and big farms? And small farms, we just can't be as efficient as the big conglomerate farms in the state, and we can't afford the labor-saving machines that they can use over many hundreds of acres, or we haven't got that many things. And yet, I want to be about the business of farming in the fabric of my own community. And so I want to address that issue too. And so now it just came up because the supply lines broke down during the COVID thing, and people were dumping milk and, slaughtering animals and things because they couldn't get them to the stores, and people in the stores were looking for food. And how do we decide as an organization that we want to do local farms in the fabric of their own community versus big farms located in other places?
Well, it's a great question. It's a tough question, and it's probably one that every person on the call today has an opinion on. So I'm going to take a crack at it, and then I'm going to open it up, and I'd welcome Julia, Mitch, or Jimmy to chime in with their own perspective, because it really is a critical question. So what we say at AFT, and we mean it, we don't just say this, is that we are about farms of all sizes and all scales. We we are somewhat agnostic about that issue. We believe that all farms, regardless of size, can do better by the land, can farm in a more environmentally sound way. Small farms have some advantages of more eyes on the ground and a little bit more intently that in some ways may allow you to farm in a manner that per unit might be a little bit more environmentally sound. But big farms can take huge strides and can afford equipment that maybe things around, say, precision ag, which will allow huge environmental benefits. And if we want to rack up the benefits from agriculture, we need to do it on millions and millions of acres. So both farms have a place on the environmental side, and I think the pandemic has shown us that we also need a wide variety of farms to be serving our food system, so that there's redundancy in the system, and we're not relying on all of our lettuce from just a few farms in one place, for instance. So we feel very strongly that diversity of farms is critically important, not just because it sounds nice, but it's actually important for the economics and the security and the environmental benefits. So that's my take on it. And I'm curious if any of my three guests want to chime in with their opinion.
So this is Julia. I'll jump in because I think your question is incredibly important, and I think about ag viability and individual farm viability a lot. And I think the predicament that you lay out is a predicament that's affecting most of agriculture since, according to USDA, 95% of our farms are either small or mid-sized, and they control at least half of the ag land. So they're not making nearly as much money as the 3% of million-dollar farms, but they're incredibly important, as John is saying, to the fabric of our communities, the resiliency of our communities, as well as our food systems, as well as numerous other things. So to me, one place that we really have to start, I these days don't hold out hope that immediately, maybe in the next farm bill, we could start something like a small farm division in USDA to look at these issues and think about, are there specific policies we need to help smaller and small commercial farms, especially in mid-sized farms, stay viable and compete in this complex workplace? That the global and domestic as well as within states and regions. But I also think that if we start at the ground up in community planning and making sure that our communities are farm friendly and doing what we call planning for agriculture or planning for agriculture and food systems, we can really look locally at what's needed to support our local farmers, or in other parts of the country, farmers and ranchers, and make sure that we have a local policy environment supportive and invest in the infrastructure that people need, or making markets available as well as land use planning. So that would be that's where I put a lot of thought and attention these days.
Great, Julia. Now, you've been using the term small and medium-sized farms. I assume you're using USDA's definition, so that's up to farms with $1 million in gross sales. Is that correct?
Yeah, so USDA has a break-off that they call small farms of under 350,000 gross farm cash income, I guess. And then between 350, or I guess it's, 350 to 500,000 becomes in the mid, and then you start to, when you get to the $1 million farms, those become what USDA calls large farms. Sometimes I think AFT should develop its own typology that's based on land as well as on gross income or something like that. But yeah, when I use it, I'm referring to USDA Economic Research Service numbers.
Yeah, great. And any comments from either Mitch or Jimmy on this topic? Okay, hearing none, I won't belabor it. Oh. Are you trying to
No, I was
going
to say I think Julie did a good job. I think a lot of it focuses on rebuilding markets where people are close to it. Can take
and I
advantage
just want
of
to I want to thank Peter for calling in. Peter is a great farmer. We had the opportunity to visit his farm as a staff of AFT on our last staff retreat, which was last fall. And he's an apple grower in the greater Albany area and does a superb job. So it's great to hear your voice, Peter. We have time for one last quick question, and then I warned you that we've got a special announcement tonight. I need to take a little time to talk about that. So last but not least, we have Ian from Utah.
Hey, John, it's Ian. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. Hey, I had a question about closing the loop. So I've had some interesting conversations with like food truck owners and ethnic restaurants here in Salt Lake, and it seems like there'd be some real synergy on closing the loop with farmers from their own culture. So they would sort of know the expectations of what someone who prepares food in that culture would need, and then sort of having them work together as a sort of a symbiotic relationship between the restaurant and the small farmer within an urban area or near an urban area, so they can close that loop and build a relationship. Is that something you've ever looked at?
Not me, but I'm going to turn it over to Julia, who has done more work on community food systems than anyone else I know of. So, Julia, any response to Ian?
I think it's a great idea, and I've seen small indications of that, but I think that's a really good area for expansion. I've seen it in farmers markets more than in selling to restaurants or food trucks. And so the thought of that, I think the sort of idea of value-added agriculture, this kind of falls under that, is sort of expanding from figuring out who's your market, a farmer's market, or even at a CSA, and thinking, okay, if we go to a food truck, what do we need to prepare to be culturally appropriate? And I think that that's a really great idea, and I'm going to bring it back to food system conversations that I'm in.
That's great, Julia. Thanks, Ian. I'm going to stop there because we only have a few minutes left, and I do have some exciting news I want to share. Everyone on tonight's call clearly cares deeply about farming, and I hope you share our view at AFT that farming is our future. That's what we say, and we say it because our food and our environment, I can't think of two things that are more important. They both depend on farming. Now, quietly, for the last 2 years, AFT has been conducting some essential research. I can't talk tonight. Some essential research to assess what needs to happen to have us move farming forward. Tomorrow morning, we are formally launching a major new campaign, which we are calling Farming is Our Future. And it has 3 primary programmatic priorities. The first, and this is going to resonate with what you've been hearing tonight, the first, to catalyze a new wave of agricultural land protection with the goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected land. Spent about 6.5 million acres in the first 40 years. In the next 20 years, we want to double that, another 6.5 to 7 million acres. And reducing farmland loss, this is what Mitch was referring to, by 75% in that same 20-year period. So pretty bold. Second priority, to promote regenerative farming practices at a scale that will allow agriculture to be initially carbon neutral. We'll be drawing down as much carbon as farming is producing through tractors and other means that really are hard to mitigate, but we can counter it by having farming practices that sequester that much carbon. That's the initial goal. And then ultimately to have farming be a carbon sink, to have it draw down more, which is critical to our future because farming can do things that other economic sectors never can. And third, our third priority is to help 600,000 new farmers and ranchers successfully enter the field by the time the It's recorded in the 2032 agricultural census. The ag census comes out in the years that end in the 2 and end in the 7, as all of you farm geeks know. So by the time those census figures come out, we want another 600,000 new farmers and ranchers to have entered the field. Now, these goals are bold, but they are doable. Beyond this, these goals are necessary if we're going to create a prosperous and sustainable future. Now, AFT has always been what I call a high leverage organization. We've been able to bring about outsized results because of how we have done our work, building upon good research, seeking common ground, practical solutions, effectively advancing public policy, and catalyzing work in other organizations. Now, when I list these ambitious goals for our campaign, they may sound like things that no organization can do on its own. And that is true. That is true in at least 2 ways. First, AFT will continue to be a leader of a movement, not the solo player. And second, we can't do any of this without our members and supporters, without you. So, I've called this a campaign. That usually means money, doesn't it? So the price tag for this work is far less than you may think because of how AFT leverages other resources and catalyzes other players. It's $100 million. That's a small investment for what it will yield, but it remains a pretty daunting amount of money to raise. Yet here's the kicker. We've already raised over $60 million. Quietly, over the last 2 years, we've secured over $60 million, mostly from major donors, both individuals and institutions, who believe in our mission and know how critical it is to pursue these priorities aggressively and immediately. Now, we are broadening our outreach to raise the remainder of that funding, which is obviously essential for our success. And you can help. Donation of any size obviously helps. But you can also help by raising awareness among your friends, family, neighbors, acquaintances, everybody you know. Do what we refer to at AFT of creating a barely restrained mob who are demanding that we do what's right by agriculture. We have this great 2-minute video that you can share and a whole bunch of other information. Just minutes ago, we went live with a special campaign section of our website, although we're not telling anyone except you about it until tomorrow. So you can be among the first to see the video and read about AFT's plans to transform agriculture through this big Farming is Our Future campaign. And you can check that out on our website, which is www.farmland.org, and then put in /future. And it will bring you right to that page on the campaign, and you can check out the video. It's 2 minutes. It's great. I really hate to end with a pitch. Yeah, and yet, as we all know, this is an issue that warrants our attention and support. And none of us ever needs to be ashamed to ask for support for something so integral to the future of our society and our planet. In fact, shame on me if I didn't ask, right? My children wouldn't forgive me, and nor should they. So a big thanks tonight to Mitch and Jimmy and Julia, and a big thanks to all of you who joined us for this evening. Thank you for your passion on the subject. Thank you for your commitment to AFT and to the future of farming, which, of course, is our future. Good night.